Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh. And Ross and I are walking the Cotswold Way in aid of sepsis research. Hi there, and welcome to episode 5 of our Cotswold Way walk. It's all going very well. When I left you just a couple of days ago, I was leaning against the pillar behind me, pretty exhausted. I feel fresh, I've got new sandwiches in my pack, and we're heading off through Painswick and on our way sort of northwest. The weather has taken a turn for the worst. It looks as though we may get some proper rain. Actually, I'm quite excited by that. Let's go. Shortly after leaving the little lay-by in which we finished episode 4, we come to signs saying things like active golf course, beware golfers. It all seemed a little OTT until we stepped onto the course and I remembered how difficult it is to work out from which direction the threat of flying golf balls is likely to come. Having said that, it's best to relax in the knowledge that golfers, on the whole, don't want to kill innocent walkers, and if you stick to the path, almost all of them will be aware of the Cotswold Way running through the course. Concentrate instead on the beauty of the surroundings. It's an extraordinary change from the landscape we're used to. We're walking in much more English conditions than we're used to. We're taking a little bit of shelter under some trees on the golf course that tops Painswick Beacon. We've just passed the enormous and wonderful fortifications, Iron Age fortifications that we'll tell you about. It's an amazing start to the walk. It's also manicured. Golf courses are extraordinary, but it's enjoyable. Inevitably it's manicured, mown and neat and tidy, of course it is, and I know I moan about the tendency of our new arrivals to neaten things when they arrive in the countryside, but this is somehow different. Perhaps it's because it has a clear purpose. Above us are the ramparts of one of the biggest of all the prehistoric fortifications and settlements we've seen on this walk, Painswick Beacon. The Painswick Local History Society writes on their website, Painswick Beacon was the home of the first inhabitants of Painswick of whom we know anything. Tall, blonde-haired Celts. Goaded by fear, they built enormous ramparts round the beacon summit to keep out hostile neighbours and the dreaded wolf pack that howled through the forest, which then covered the entire parish and most of England, except for a few open hilltops. Trails led through the forest from the mud, wattle and timber huts inside the ramparts of the beacon to the neighbouring settlements at Crickley by Birdlip and on the spur of Haresfield Beacon. With eyes and ears constantly alert for wolves, our Painswick Celts would by day drive their flocks out of the camp through the 2 gateways in its ramparts to feed. I feel all my romanticising of the ancient trails we've walked over the last few weeks seem to be justified, despite the scepticism from 1 or 2 of our viewers. Determined to maintain and preserve the extraordinary fortifications from erosion, both from great footfall and wild weather from the west, the local groups keen on this place have spent innumerable hours and not inconsiderable sums of money on work to keep it from damage. Long may their efforts prevail. Once you've crossed the golf course, the trail runs just along the edge of a working quarry. Still, this remarkable stone, from which so many of the local buildings are made, is being dug from the hills. There was, of course, a time when this was the cheapest and most obvious building material to use for making houses. Not any longer, I fear, but at least there is still a market for the stone to keep up the wonderful Cotswold buildings that already exist. Soon we find ourselves walking into the town of Painswick itself. Familiar to us as we visited during COVID all those years ago, but still strikingly unspoiled and beautiful. It's true that it's all too easy to fall into the land of epithet, which can be very misleading and date terribly, but the widely used description of Painswick as the Queen of the Cotswolds still somehow seems appropriate. It sits above its own eponymous little river with charming views. The streets are full of 17th and 18th century houses built of the local stone that ages to this wonderful silver-grey colour. The ancient road between Gloucester and Cirencester passed through this town, and it was an important centre for clothing manufacture after the raw wool trade was supplanted by manufacturing. The local stonemasons, who made a great living from the local quarries, put their hearts and souls into commemorating their local dignitaries with a wonderful selection of tombs in the churchyard. As with many towns in the Cotswolds, it's had its ups and downs, and its decline came about mainly because of its remoteness and difficulty of access. As a place to live, however, well, for me, it sits very high indeed on the list. We've taken a small detour to have a look again at this extraordinary churchyard with these amazing yew trees that supposedly nobody can count. When we last came here, it was COVID time and we couldn't get to see the inside of the church. So we've done this little detour as an extra treat for you, and we're going to show you the inside of this beautiful church. The church really doesn't disappoint. There is little, if any, of the original Norman church surviving. It's mostly 15th century with, as usual, many modernisations over the years, especially in the 1800s. Fires in 1763 and later in 1883, both caused by lightning, necessitated extensive restoration, and the resulting church is full of fascinating details as a result. Clearly, we will have to come back shortly and do a Cotswold Explorer piece on this church, and I promise we will. After all, I really must tell you about the fiendish acolyte of Henry VIII, Sir William Kingston, who set up a gallows in the nearby village of Sheepscombe, where innumerable irritants to the king were slaughtered, and who was responsible for general acts of such horror that frankly I'm surprised that his brass monument and that of his wife are still surviving. It makes for a wonderful story for me to tell. Very soon, I promise. Meanwhile, all the features of this church are absolutely worth your while taking a little time over as you walk past on the Cotswold Way. Having checked out the gruesome metal stocks in the small square beside the church, we start the process of searching out the Cotswold Way's exit from the town, only to discover it runs straight down the lane at the other end of the churchyard, accessed through the old-looking but actually comparatively newly constructed Lich Gate, another thing we'll tell you about later. Following the signs, we soon find ourselves in the countryside again, and lo and behold, a surprise. It's clearly always a great idea to keep your eyes open when you're doing a walk like this. This little memorial, quite a modern, probably locally made, caught my eye. And then I noticed the plaque on it, which reads, Tony Drake, MBE, 1923 to 2012, to commemorate his 60 years' work for the Ramblers Association in opening up the footpath network in Gloucestershire and throughout England and Wales, and as a principal creator of the Cotswold Way. An important memorial for us to notice as we walk by. I stopped quite soon after leaving the town to have a bite of sustenance, and Ross took the opportunity to fly the drone, which shows so clearly the way this town sits, wrapped in the embrace of soft hills. I'm sorry to be leaving. We cross a little stream tributary of the River Painswick over a slightly rickety bridge and start to climb once more. Every single day we walk this trail, I'm reminded of Ross's joke. What goes down must go up. That's for sure. But then, a considerable morale boost. A stone pillar marking the length of the Cotswold Way in both directions. We've walked 47 miles and have 55 to go. Very nearly halfway. A brief moment of excitement, after which a steep climb certainly silenced me. We walked across the fields and up a steep bit of paved road to the edge of the village of Edge. Crossing the road, we enter another of the numerous specially preserved areas of wild countryside that populate this extraordinary walk. Shrubs and scrub, blanketed in wild flowers, suffering just a bit from the lack of moisture this year's summer has imposed upon them, but with a wonderful feeling of natural habitat that is becoming the signature of the Cotswold Way. After topping the hill, we descend to a wooded contour and follow it round a kind of W shape in the hills towards our stage midpoint. As always in these hills, the woodland is pockmarked with ancient quarries, bites out of the hill where stone from the dry stone walling, so typical of the Cotswolds, have been dug by ancient hands, now overgrown with trees, and overall it makes for a hauntingly beautiful landscape. Kind of halfway through this episode, the atmosphere has changed. As you can tell, I've even got a different hat on. This is to protect me from the rain. We have our first named storm, first for ages in August actually. It's very unusual in England, but it's a big storm. It's mainly in Scotland, it has to be said, but that tail is whipping round and hitting us on the western side of the Cotswolds. The winds are high, the trees of course are full of leaves, so it's going to be quite dramatic. We're heading for Haresfield Beacon. I'm looking forward to it. Come with us. Leaving the lonely lay-by in which we'd ended the last filmed leg of our journey in sunshine and rejoined it a couple of days later in a storm, we come across a small stone building right on the bend where the road joins the path, for an unusual close-up view of something very common indeed in these hills. One of the reasons this area has been popular for human settlement since the Iron Age is the abundance of water sources. The limestone hills are littered with springs, where the water table reaches a level in the ground and pours wonderful clear stone-filtered water out onto the hill. These water sources took on mystical, religious and often miraculous status, and many were covered and protected by the grateful population. This is a spring head, evidently improved by the digging of a small well, which will have been the water source for all local people. If you keep your eyes open as you walk the Cotswold Way, you'll spot many of these little buildings hidden in the woods. I am just old enough to remember exactly the same thing at the house in which I was born and brought up. A small building deep in the woods from which the water was pumped up to our house by a lovely old boy called Mr. Wicks, who visited once or twice a week to prime and set the pump, which then filled a tank in the roof, giving us a slight but sufficient water pressure for running taps. That building is still there, although ruinous, to confuse the vast majority of passers-by who have never known a world where mains water did not exist. Goodness, what a long way we've come in my lifetime. Obviously, we climb again. We are, after all, heading for a beacon, which does suggest a high spot. And after a short while we come across a stone edifice for which I'm unable to find any explanation. This is my opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to use you lot, the incredible and knowledgeable audience we're lucky enough to have, to help me out. You can see what it looks like. It's possible you'll be able to decipher the lettering. Please do tell us if you know what this is. Surely it's something important. As we turn the corner of the hill, I think you can see what I was wittering on about a few minutes ago. The wonderful westerly wind hits us full on.
We've just come out of the shelter of these lovely woods, and now the atmosphere has changed completely. The wind is blowing incredibly strongly. It's coming from over in that direction, and there's a wonderful sight of rainstorms on their way. This is a whole different animal. It's very exciting.
We come shortly to an extremely remote farmstead, with a farmer with a slightly gruesome sense of humour. This may not be here when you come by, following us in our footsteps, but just look at what stares down at us from the open loft door of the barn. Spooky or what? With the wind howling and the rain soaking us through, this vision sent a shiver through us all. Even Gizmo uttered a deep growl. I've never heard him do that before. And so we set about the inevitable climb to the top.
I think we can safely say, and I've no idea whether you can hear me or not, because it's blowing so hard up here, but I think we can safely say we've reached the halfway point. It's so exciting. Here, oh, goodness me, the gales are blowing ferociously up here. I do feel for the poor people in Scotland who are getting the full force of this storm. But even its little tail that is thrashing us on the western edge of the Cotswolds is ferocious enough. But look at that beautiful view. That's where we're heading for, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you come with us.
Fortunately, we drop down a bit after that onslaught and have a little bit of relief from the wind. But once again, there is a change in the feel of our environment. We get a sense that the paths are much, much more trodden than heretofore. We must surely be approaching an urban area. These woods, owned and run, it seems, by the National Trust, are well used and have the wonderful feel of an adult playground. It always feels great to me when it's clear that everyone is using the remarkable countryside by which we're all surrounded. Sure enough, we broach another hill, and before us lies what is known as the Seven Valleys. Dominated by the town of Stroud, the villages of this area fill the deep-cut valleys for miles with a mixture of residential housing and old mills and factories. During the reign of Elizabeth I, the export of raw wool, that staple of riches, if you'll forgive the pun, bestowed on so many of the towns and villages we visited over the years, was banned because so much of it was being transformed into cloth and other products abroad and then sold back to us at inflated prices. Elizabeth decided that we'd be much better off if we manufactured our own cloth using our own wool. Now why, in the name of Donald Trump, does that sound familiar? Suddenly, the settlements blessed with abundant water to power mills of various types became the most important settlements in the whole region. In fact, this set of valleys became one of the most prosperous areas in the whole country. The wonderful and in their time revolutionary buildings designed to house this industry are now often listed and protected buildings, but it's frightening how many are slowly slipping into a state of decay. We'll talk briefly about that in our next episode when we walk past one in particular. Meanwhile, we spot a sign that innovative industry in the area is by no means dead. Our track leads us through an absolutely beautiful and brilliantly kept vineyard. By the look of the vines, they're fairly new by vineyard standards, but the grapes on the vines promise a decent harvest, and I'm sure the quality will be terrific. After doing my research, I discovered these fabulous fields are part of the Woodchester Vineyard estate, which, having known for many years how brilliant they are, comes as no real surprise. For the second time in this one episode, I'm made to reflect upon the changes that have taken place in my lifetime. When I decided in 1968 to join the wine trade, there was really only one vineyard in the whole of England where it would have been useful to work. It was owned by a retired soldier and diplomat called Sir Guy Salisbury Jones, and it was in Hambledon in Hampshire. I went to see him, and he advised me to join the merchant side of the business, and the rest of my career was decided. To get practical experience, I went to France for a harvest. Nowadays, without a shadow of doubt, I would have tried very hard to find a position in one of the many amazing vineyards there are around the country. This passing glimpse has brought me considerable pleasure. We crossed the rickety bridge over the main railway line west and dropped down into the village of Stonehouse, which sits on the restored Stroud Water Canal, originally opened in 1779. It's here, on the banks of the canal, that we finish this section of our walk with an important announcement.
Well, we've reached the end of episode 5. All kinds of really interesting landmarks. We've crossed the halfway point, which of course for us is a big morale booster. We're delighted with that. It is the middle now, the end of episode 5, is because it will be 10 episodes in all. So we've come to the central point. We've dropped down into a rather different kind of environment. The Stroud Valley is rather more industrial. It's quite exciting in a way, in all kinds of ways actually, but very different from the Cotswolds we've been used to. Now don't forget, subscribe to the channel. Find us incidentally on our subscription channel, which is hosted on Patreon, where you can see all our Cotswold stuff without any ads, which is a bonus, plus a lot of nice ghost stories. And please have a little look at our Just Giving page, where anything would be more than welcome. We're doing really well. We've reached, I think, about $2.5 now, but we'd like to have a little bit more if possible. So please have a look at Just Giving. And we'll see you next week with a very special guest. There's a lovely man called Al Sylvester, who is a proper traveller and explorer. He's an MBE.
He has had an extraordinary career in some very extreme environments, and he proposed to his wife on Christmas Day, on camera, on one knee, from the South Pole. Now, it's difficult to imagine beating that. So join us next week with Al Sylvester, a sepsis survivor and all-round hero.